is an event on Dreamland indeed when Lisette Larkins is back with us. She's the author of two of your favorites, Talking to Extraterrestrials and Calling on Extraterrestrials. And now she has got a new one out, the book that has been begging to be written, Listening to Extraterrestrials, Telepathic Coaching by Enlightened Beings. And before I go to Lisette, I just want to read something from the foreword to give you an idea of where we're going here. The foreword was not written by Lisette. It was written by Dutchy Kid, an abduct or contactee, I guess, who has simply read the book and made use of it, and says, you see, this book was written for people like me, for ordinary people who desire contact and work to achieve it. So if that's not what you desire, then don't listen to this. But there is a good side to the whole contact issue. As you know, I've experienced both sides myself, and there is a good side. And so, Lisette, why don't we start by going through a little bit of your early life and why this came into your life?
Thanks, Whitley. That's a challenging question to answer. And the older I get and the more I have these contacts and experiences with these otherworldly beings, the more I keep wanting to recontextualize it for people and reframe it that, when we say, why me? Why did they come to me? If we attempt to think of this in a whole different way, that in fact contact is simply about relationships. That's all it is. We meet people here, we meet people there. On this planet, we meet all different kinds of people.
Right.
And the quality and the manner of those relationships depend on us and them. And, there's all kinds of work that's been written about how to improve our marriages and how to improve our love relationships and our work relationships ad nauseum. The problem and the challenge is that usually we don't recognize that if we want to improve, if you will, the quality and manner of our otherworldly relationships, all we need to do is apply the same principles, because the universal law holds. And how I mean that is that we can't pretend that we have something to do with the quality and manner of our relationships with each other and pretend that we have nothing whatsoever to do with those beings who are not across the street but across the galaxy or across the universe, as it were.
Now, let me ask you this. I tried some of the methods in your book just last night.
Right.
And there was an immediate result. And I wasn't too surprised that there would be, because they're not so different from the methods I use myself.
Right.
Now, I have the same question for you that I have for myself. Who is there? Who's out there? Is it? Why do you think they're extraterrestrials? I can never tell, actually, where they're coming from.
You know what? At first, a person may not be able to know, Whitley. It's kind of like if I go on a chat room, and I log on and I say, and I key in, hi, how you doing? And somebody returns, hi, how are you? At that moment, if somebody said, who the heck are you talking to? I'd say, I have no clue. And fair enough, we don't know at first. But the key is to continue the conversation. Continue with the process. And more challenging is be willing to keep opening the door a little more as one feels more confident, as one feels safe and empowered. Just continue to open the door, and then we will know. And that's part of the adventure. We don't know at first. The question is, are we willing, though, to know eventually? And so, we also wonder, well, one of the most common questions is, how do we know who we're going to get? It's just too scary. People feel that we've all heard the terrible, the victimizing and the stories from people who feel that they've genuinely been harmed. And then there's me, who says, I've had great experiences. So how do you know who you're going to get? And it's the same. I bring it right back to here. We know that on this planet, we've got Saddam Hussein and Mother Teresa and everybody in between. We've
Right.
we have this diverse level of spiritual growth as demonstrated by a person's actions. We know, we can pretty much guess where Saddam Hussein is, in his spiritual growth based on his actions, right? And conversely, with the other side of the coin, people who are very much of service, people who just are loving, and you get that about them immediately. So on this planet, in this realm, we don't go around wringing our hands saying, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to go to the mall because I don't know who's going to show up. Or, oh my gosh, I'm afraid to go on a date because it's just too scary. We have certain things that we do, and we don't have to say a huge prayer or invoke some special form of protection before we get in our cars and go out.
Because we trust the world we live in.
Yes, and we also know that, to some degree, we're starting to really believe this. We're starting to know this, Whitley, and I think those of us who really are wanting to grow, in our own spiritual sophistication, we're really, and it's so hard sometimes, I agree, but we're wanting to more and more when we have relationships that don't work for us, and let's face it, we all have them. I do too. The difficult, challenging relationships where there's tension and challenge, I still have to come back and say, what is it about me that has called this to myself? What is here for me to what can I learn from this so I can get on with it and move forward? The problem is that we will almost never apply that to our otherworldly experiences. We're so quick to say, I've been victimized, I got nothing to do with it. We don't look at our demeanor. We know that quantum physicists have proven that like attracts like. We know that if we're recently divorced and we're convinced that all of the opposite sex is horrible, then we know, and I know from my experiences way back when I was divorced and I started to date again, that the same kind of person kept showing up based on what belief I had about men. I mean, it's uncanny how what we believe shows up. It shows up. So it's so important to start noticing that in those ways we're calling a certain type to ourselves. And if we search our soul and we search our heart and say, you know what, I feel that I have been a certain kind of generous, loving person, and I'm still attracting victimizers, we can still do something with that information. But we do not have to become traumatized, become fearful, and then slam the door to further experience.
Right. Well, exactly. I did become traumatized and fearful, but I did not do that because I didn't see any evidence that what was there was really negative, and it was very much in my physical environment at the time, and I was dreadfully afraid, but I forced myself to go past my fear, and I would not say that it ever opened up into a sort of it was actually all wonderful deal.
Right.
They were tough as nails always, but never, I don't think they were ever menacing toward me. I was never sure, and I'll tell you why. One time, about a year after I had my first remembered close encounter in December of '85, I got this, what I would say was a call to go down into the woods, and in the early hours of the morning, and I knew suddenly that the visitors were there, and understand I had sort of planned this with them, using techniques similar to the ones that you describe over a period of weeks. So I knew pretty much what was supposed to happen. And I went through on my house slippers and robe in the middle of cold January, early February day, and went across the yard and out into the woods, and I could hear their thing that they had, which made a very strange sort of clanking noise when it was like in park or whatever. It was down in a glade just beyond our woods, and I could see it, and I could see shadowy figures standing in front of it too, through the trees. And I was walking down there, and suddenly I heard a voice in my head when I paused for a moment, going, "Come on, come on." And it was so rough and so mean that I just got scared, and I thought to myself, my God, I've got a family to support. What if I go down there and just disappear from the face of the earth?
Right.
Then I finally I turned around and I went back to the house. The moment I put my hand on the door handle, there came from the woods 3 of the richest, most extraordinary cries I have. In fact, the 3 most complex sounds I've ever heard in my life. They were incredibly beautiful, sweet, sad, bereft, and filled with understanding at the same time. I went back into the house. I got on the edge of my bed, and suddenly this disincarnate presence poured into the room, and seemed to touch my mind, and I had memories which I still retain, kind of given back to me or opened up in me, of the moment when I was born and the moment when I first walked. What was that all about, Lisette? I think you might know. Were they dangerous? What would have happened to me if I'd gone down there?
You know, I can't say for you. I can't say for anyone. It's kind of like as we're standing at the top of the aisle, you know, about ready to walk down the center of the church and marry this person that we've decided to marry, you know, and we turn to our parents and we say, is this the right person? You know, I don't want to make a mistake. And ultimately, we can't know at this moment in time what might have been or what could have been or who they were, and I wouldn't even pretend to be able to answer that. But I do honor each of our ability and choice to make a decision. For example, if a person is setting up the system whereby they're in their home and they're trying to invite this contact, and they get some kind of a knock on the door symbolically. You know, just like when we're eating dinner and the phone rings and we answer the phone and it's a salesperson, we say, no, thank you, and we hang up the phone. You know, so it's very empowering to know that, like you had, where you chose not to go forward. And that's powerful and empowering. And that's what we get to do. So many of us have believed that somehow we're just pulled along and there's no choice. And I would like to submit that when we start believing that we do have a choice, we start to notice places where we could have said no thank you, and we don't have to become traumatized, we don't have to wring our hands, we can just go, you know what, there was an invitation to go further, and I said, nope, not interested.
This is Whitley Strieber, it's Dreamland. We'll be right back, and when we do come back, we're going to find out from Lisette whether or not you may be in contact without knowing it. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. We're talking to Lisette Larkins, listening to Extraterrestrials, telepathic coaching by enlightened beings. Lisette has a long lifetime history of contact. Lisette, when did this first start happening to you?
In 1987.
And what happened?
I was married, I had a young child, and I didn't really consider that anything like this could ever have happened to me. You know, I just saw covers on tabloids that people could be abducted by aliens, and I never paid it any attention. But I had one night, you know, the typical beam of light through the bedroom ceiling, and I felt trauma. My heart was beating wildly, and I then started to fall asleep. And then I would awaken in the morning, and every appliance in the house was broken. And this kind of thing went on for 2 years without any other visual. Well, that's not entirely accurate. I would have visuals, for example, I would have these disembodied spirits as far as humans that looked like they had, you know, died, crossed over, and were coming to me, but no connection to, say, an alien face, if you will. And so it felt as many things that were happening in those early years were what many people who have had near-death experiences describe. So overnight, I could hear people's thoughts as soon as these lights had descended on me. Although I would fall asleep for these long periods, so I didn't know what was happening.
What was it like when you heard people's thoughts?
Oh, it was crazy-making, which is why after about 2 years, I ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and I was there for 3 weeks. So why was it
crazy-making? What was it? What made you feel crazy when you heard people's thoughts?
Because many times they were different than what the person was saying to me. So, for example, I would meet somebody and I would hear their thoughts, and yet they were presenting a smiling face, and instead their thoughts might be completely opposite. So I'm talking about
very familiar. I know that well.
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking about in a business environment, and so that in and of itself, that wasn't the only thing that was going on. Other
Do you
things.
still hear them?
I do occasionally. It also started happening with animals.
Yes. Oh, yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. How wonderful.
And
I never talked about this because I don't know anybody else who does this, but that's marvelous. Tell us. Do tell us.
Well, I genuinely believe that we all have these abilities. And so when we touch those otherworldly energies, those higher electromagnetic energies, it just kind of gives us a jump start. And we go, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm a universal being, and like other universal beings, I have all these abilities, and there we are. But like I did, I closed down. I was terrified. I was traumatized. I didn't feel that I could tell anybody about it. I didn't feel I could talk to anybody about it. I felt shame and ridicule rather than a sense of delight and adventure. And so, I started to implode. I started to my then husband would come home from these business trips and find me in the closet, huddled.
Oh, my
so
goodness.
And it's so silly when I look back, because had I had any wherewithal to celebrate that, instead of going into this whole thing of, I went right to the victimization place, and it was a very normal, in that time, place for me to be.
Well,
if I didn't understand it, if it was frightening to me, then I must be being victimized, right? So, now, today, I found that...
Wait, let's go back to something terribly important that you just said. Listen up, everybody. She said, if it's frightening to me, I must be being victimized, right? And I know there are a lot of people out there listening to this who feel that same feeling that she felt and that I felt, when actually it's not victimization. Why... Give us a little bit of insight into why you said that, Lisette, and what's really behind it.
Because I know how I was raised in my culture. I know how we were all raised, and we were raised in a culture in which our government, our employers, our schools, none of us grow up talking about ET encounters. And so when they start happening, what is the mind to do but to become traumatized? When something happens and there's no cultural context in which to place it, fear happens. That's what it's all about. That's how fear serves us. If there's nothing to identify it with, then we feel fear. We feel discomfort. When I first started speaking in public, I felt terrified. Well, was I being victimized by my audience? And there's that wonderful story when we go back to the Fuegians, the tribes people who were discovered by Ferdinand Magellan in 1540. Those tribes people standing on the shore who observed those giant masted schooners, or whatever those big ships were called then. They looked out to sea, and the legend has it that they could not see the ships in the bay. And they discovered
thought they were islands.
And they discovered that when they pointed them out and when they said, look more closely, many of them ran screaming into the woods. Now, were the ships victimizing those tribes people? Just by virtue of beholding something that was not known to their world, they felt trauma. And so they were of a canoe culture. So when the longboats came ashore and those seamen dealt with those tribes people, they were amazed how much trauma these people could actually feel about something as innocuous as a ship. So it's kind of the same thing, whether we're talking about those ships or these ships in the sky, which, by the way, would explain how can some people see craft and other people don't, right? Well, just think of the Fuegians. Some could see the ships and some people couldn't. It depends on, the eyes see only what the mind is capable of comprehending. And so as we ready ourselves, we'll see more. And as we keep the conversation going, like you do so wonderfully, Whitley, as we talk about this, we're opening our hearts and our souls.
Right. Talking about it is everything. Talking about it is literally everything. It's why I do what I do. It's why you write what you write. And absolutely correct. We have to have this dialogue, and because it's out of this dialogue that our own path as a species is going to come. And no matter how disdained this dialogue may be, it remains irrevocably at the leading edge of human experience, and it is the future. There's no question whatsoever about it. You know, it's interesting, speaking of disdain, that there's a change of mind taking place among some people, sort of intellectuals who felt very, very threatened by this when it first began to emerge in some way, and they used to sneer in the New York Times and places like that on NPR at the poor trailer dummies who thought they were seeing flying saucers and so forth, thus revealing their own the sense of threat that they actually felt. That was perfectly characterized to me by astronaut Rusty Schweikert one evening when he said to me, "You know, Whitley, I can hear the sincerity in what you're telling me, but I just don't want it to be true. Right. And I don't want it to be true because I don't want the road to Mars to be a well-worn path." And we're like Garrison Keillor, who utterly disdains this with a rock-ribbed, old-fashioned kind of left-wing intellectual approach that it all has to be stupidity and nonsense. He would never dream of even looking into it. He represents a whole subclass of people, most of them older now, who reject this out of hand.
Right.
And reject it as absolute nonsense and impossible and out of hand, and would say that you're talking to your own mind. You're not talking to anyone outside of it. But just last night, when I tried, I found immediately there was an answer. And I knew it was authentic because it said, "Don't worry so much about yourself." And this was a theme of my relationship with the lady on the cover of Communion. She was really into working on the ego. And if I chose not to work on my ego, she would work on it for me.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. For example, once when my brother was at the cabin, I was being a little bit braggadocio because I was having a big success in my life, and he was still just a struggling young lawyer. And we were down in the very field I just talked about, and we saw a light crossing the sky. And then it got misty in the field, and there were some figures standing there, ghostly sort of figures. And I heard her voice, which was lower than I can ever express, go, "Arrogance. Let me see, what did she say? I can do what I want to you." The next day, some sort of a computer error occurred, and all of our money disappeared from our bank accounts for 24 hours.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, this is a recurring theme in my life. Work on this. It is definitely. And this is, in my opinion, contact with a higher level of being. I see it as extraterrestrial because of her. But if I had only had that voice last night, Lisette, I still don't know where I would have put that. Where you're so sure it's extraterrestrial, but you haven't really given us.
No, I'm not sure at all what it is. That's why I'm saying keep opening the door. If somebody, right now, I'm sitting in my office and my door is closed. Right. If somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hey, Lisette," and you say to me, "Who is that?" I don't know. If unless I recognize the voice of my son, I don't know who it is. I'm not going to suggest that was an extraterrestrial or even a woman or my coworker. I don't know. What I'm saying is keep going, and it may be an otherworldly being. And this is why those listeners, those people who are desperately curious about UFO phenomena, there's a reason for that. Oftentimes, it suggests that those souls are here in this embodiment to get the ball rolling. Those very souls are the metamorphs, a word that I use to describe human beings who are destined to be the first of the group to walk between worlds and know and relate to ETs. So
we're going to have to take a little break here, Lisette, and when we get back, what is a metamorph? You might be one. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. Lisette Larkins is with us. She's got a new book, Listening to Extraterrestrials, part of the ongoing process of attempting to communicate that she has been talking about for years from her own extensive and I think very, very valid experience. Lisette has thought carefully about this, and there's a lot of value here. The truth is, it's not hard to do this. It isn't something special that you can't do. That's not the message. The message is, all you have to do is turn to it, and it's there for you. What is a metamorph?
It's a human who is desperately curious about UFO phenomena, and as a result, it may indeed suggest that they have a soul plan set up before birth, in which they raise their hand and say, yes, I want to be one of those humans living in this time in the world when the politics are this particular way and the earth environment is in this particular way. And I want to be one of the pioneers who leads the way, who leads the evolution of the species, in which we raise our hand and say, I have known, I know and relate to otherworldly beings. And I can thrive as a result of that contact. I do not buy the myth and the illusion anymore that I must be victimized by otherworldly beings. Now, before we can get to that place, though, I want to suggest that we have to adopt a shift in our understanding. You know, the subject of UFO phenomena, perhaps more than any other, is prone to the proclivities that are sponsored by fear and judgment. And that's because of the culture in which we're raised. We know that. So, you know, I have this universal Bill of Rights that I have on my refrigerator. And I remind myself that we have the right to explore our universe with confidence and to believe that it's not impossible or inherently unsafe. We have the right and the ability to know and relate to extraterrestrials without needing our government to act as an intermediary or facilitator to these relationships, a la NASA. You know, in other words, you have to have some special training or equipment to travel and walk between worlds or to have any proof that there's otherworldly life.
Well, I don't think you do need special training or equipment, because I can attest from personal experience. I was buck naked when I first had a close encounter, and I survived.
And I love that. To me, is the greatest treat of all. Is that contactees, exactly, they're not wearing spacesuits, they have no PhDs, they have no special training or equipment. Just by the virtue of who they are as universal beings, can have these relationships.
Now, on that first contact experience, I endured what can only be described as a rape. I was penetrated by a device which I, many years later, after listening to my own hypnosis tapes and then finding out about this thing called an electrostimulator that's used to be used in humans when people had erectile dysfunction, and they wanted it was used in the place of what Viagra is used for now,
right? And
is still used in animal husbandry all the time. And semen was extracted from me, and it happened. It happened. Now, why would I think that I wasn't being victimized? I'm curious to know.
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding here. Some of the early relationships in my life, meaning my first marriage, they were really difficult. I allowed myself in those relationships, you know, in some instances I could say, you know what, I would even go so far as to say that I was victimized. Now, looking back over 20 years, I recognize the role that I played in the dynamics of that dance that we did. So I'm not suggesting that people don't have a sense of their own safety or well-being. What I'm saying is, okay, if that was your experience, okay. It's kind of like saying, if you had a rotten marriage, it doesn't mean that all marriages are rotten. That's all I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that every ET is the Dalai Lama, and any experience where one feels fear, they've misunderstood.
Well, ironically, in my situation, I do think that this same being that was responsible for this was also responsible for some of the most sublime experiences in my life. And where I've come out is that this is a complex world. Human beings are very complicated, and certainly we couldn't expect somebody with the kind of experience this person must have had to be uncomplicated, and especially because she was really very intelligent as well. And so I had a complicated, as I said, range of experiences with her, but in the end I don't feel there was something intrinsically evil and inimical to me. In fact, not. It was much of a learning experience. But is there a dark side, Lisette? Are there beings out there who are just plain evil and do not wish us well in any way?
Are there beings on planet Earth who are evil and do not wish us well in any way?
Good answer. I love it. I think that we don't even need to go any farther. But except this, a lot of people who haven't gotten into this yet, who haven't realized just how available contact actually is at this point, and getting more available every day, folks, by the way, are going to ask, well, what if I come up against some of the real bad guys? What do I do?
Now we're getting into the heart of the matter.
Yes.
And the heart of the matter is that it really helps us to return our examples and our analogies to what we know about our relationships with each other. What we have discovered, what many of us have discovered, God knows what I have discovered, is that when I change and shift who I am inside, magically, wondrously, the kind of people who show up to meet me, to date me, to employ me, to marry me, they have a different quality than they did 20 years ago. Now, why is that? Is it that the kinds of people on this planet changed? No, it's because who I am inside changed. So what it means is we can set ourselves up to meet more of the ones that we say that we want and less of the ones that we say that we don't want. And how we do that is what some of these techniques are about. And it's so ironic because I don't care what we're talking about. If we're talking about, some of you may remember the books by Og Mandino, the famous author who sold like billions of books about the world's greatest salesman. It was all about how to make more money. I don't care what field you're talking about, whether you're trying to improve your financial abundance, if you're trying to find the spouse of your dreams, if you're trying to raise a wonderful child. It doesn't matter what the subject is. There are certain ideas of beingness that we're getting sets up and attracts more of the ones that we say that we want. So it's that simple. This is not rocket science. What it means is, first, if we change the way that we approach and believe about otherworldly relationships, that's the first step, and it is a huge one.
Yes.
It's a huge one. You don't have to do anything else. If you change that, everything changes. Because the less we know, this is a quote from Richard Bach, the famous author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Right.
He says, the less we know about the game and the less we remember we're players, the more senseless living becomes. So all we're doing is we're recognizing spiritual principles which says like attracts like, and we're applying those to the relationships of the universe. And so there are, by the way, flaming arrows that are constantly coming at metamorphs. Constantly. And what do those look like? Those are the flaming arrows that prevent us from having these adventures with otherworldly beings, these positive adventures. And they are the flaming arrows of self-doubt, the flaming arrows of others' fears of what we are attempting, others' criticism, our own cautiousness, fear of the unknown, belief in the cultural myth that has us believe we're unsafe and disempowered. Now, if we already agree that we get what we believe, then do we think it's important to check out these, the degree of self-doubt that we have? Because we've already agreed that the universe is set up, quantum physics says that like attracts like. Wherever you are at this little pulsing vibration, whatever that is, others of like kind will be attracted to that.
Right.
When I was a teenager and as a young woman, I was amazed at how the girls who were raised in wealthy families grew up to marry wealthy men.
Right.
And I was like, how do they do that? I mean, it's not just that they're hanging in wealthy circles. It's not just that. It's that when you have a certain consciousness about a thing, that's what you accept as real and valid, and so that's what you get more of. So you had people who expected to have a certain life of abundance. They just expected it. It was familiar to them, and that they attracted more of it. Conversely, if you have a belief that all aliens are evil, and that fear means trauma, and on and on and on, or just that, it just is inherently unsafe out there, what do you think we're going to set up?
Well, I'll tell you what we're going to set up, because we're going to talk about it in just a minute when we get back. Lisette offers a contract. You can take control of this whole process, and when you do, it's all going to begin to go much more smoothly. This is Whitley Strieber. We'll be back with Lisette Larkin and a very new kind of contract in just a moment. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We are back talking to Lisette Larkins, listening to Extraterrestrials, telepathic coaching by enlightened beings. Lisette, midway through this really rather remarkable little book, says, I'm going to ask you to enter into a contract with your as yet unknown ET coach. And if ever there was a way of stepping forward into the unknown without at once directing it or attempting to direct it, but surrendering to it while at the same time holding your cards in your own hand, this is it. Lisette, tell us a little bit more about how you came to this idea.
Well, I just recognize that we make changes when we really set our intention to do so. Whether we're deciding to start an exercise program or to make more money, it doesn't matter what it is, or to just to keep the house cleaner. It starts with an intention. And we so frequently forget to apply that to these kinds of relationships. So it helps sometimes to fill out a contract with ourselves, but the whole universe is aware of our intentions. There's an invisible agreement. All information is available to everyone at any time. So if we fill out this contract, we are understanding what our intention is, and it's kind of a way to broadcast it to the universe. So I have a form that, that one can fill out. It basically says, I would say, I, Lisette, understand that I am undertaking intensive guided sessions with enlightened extraterrestrials. Notice the word enlightened. I'm going to decide who I want to meet. I didn't say when I started dating, I want to start dating abusive alcoholics. Did I say that? No. Instead, I intended to meet a certain kind of person that had a certain level of maturity, sophistication, intelligence, humor, and kindness. So then I go on. I commit myself to a 12-week, for example, duration of practice sessions. And then I suggest that I can decide on committing myself to daily sessions in my special chat room, which we can get into later, during which I spend part of each session purging my worries or concerns and part of each session receiving a pep talk from these beings. I also understand that spiritual coaches will help me to raise issues that have haunted me or bothered me. Because, of course, the whole point of this, to me, is if I'm going to meet anybody out there, let me meet more of the enlightened ones. I mean, hello, I want some help with my soul blueprint. I know that I came here to do something. I want to get on with it. So if I'm going to meet anybody, I don't want them just to be more technologically superior to me. I want them to be more spiritually superior to me. So do I get to choose the quality and manner of my relationships? Yes. So why don't I get to help choose the quality and manner of my otherworldly ones? And so,
yes, it's very true. I mean, think about that, folks. Of course you do. Of course you do. You can choose. You can choose. This is not going to emerge. We're not going to evolve in this direction at all unless we take control of it and of our own experiences any more than you're going to successfully have a relationship with somebody you don't yet know unless you introduce yourself to them.
Right.
And they're not going to know you're there.
Right. And as far as, how often, how long we should make these practice sessions or how many times we should try a week, I discussed this thing called the activation dose. For some people, they sit down and they try to dial up the universe and they have success on the first try. Other people need more time.
Need more time, and think of it. Once you can do this all the time, you can have experiences like I had last night. 3 seconds, I get ice water thrown in my face. It was just fabulous. So,
and so they're tools that we can use. For instance, a very simple tool is music. If we know that like attracts like, and we're trying now to get ourselves that energy, that invisible energy that surrounds us, you can call it an aura, you can call it a vibration, whatever it is. If we want that to buzz really fast so that we can attract more of that same high frequency type of being, there's certain tools that we can use. Music is an amazing tool. There's this quote from the book, The Mozart Effect. Don Campbell says, "Music is a magical medium that moves, enchants, energizes, and heals us. In an instant, it can uplift our soul." So does this mean that we can use music to put ourselves in a certain mood, if you will, so that then we can start to buzz at a higher frequency, so that then we can call to the universe with joy, and maybe we'll get back a response that embodies joy? So this is just one example of how we can set ourselves up for success. It's kind of like if I'm going on a job interview, I'm not going to probably do as well as I might if I'm depressed or enraged or suicidal. You know what I mean? We can go through all of the negative emotions. I'm probably not going to have the best outcome. So what we do is we set ourselves up to be in a certain mindset, or even better, to a certain state of beingness. It helps us ensure who we're going to get to respond to our opening door.
It's also a little bit in a way about resistance. You mentioned joy. In the darkest time I ever knew in my life, in the late 80s, early 90s, when the public had pretty much turned away from me because a person's reputation can only stand so much ridicule, then you become a figure of fun. And that had happened.
Right.
And my books weren't selling at all well, and I was losing my home, and we were going into bankruptcy. And one of the few things that I ever heard from the little gray guys in clear, kind of in a spoken voice by somebody who I was in front of, they never really spoke. It was always, except for that one incident that I mentioned before and a few others, it was almost always done in pictures, and I'd gotten quite good at creating these pictures with them. It was really fun. But suddenly one night, I knew there was someone in the room. I couldn't open my eyes, and this voice, real close to my ear, at just the darkest time of my life, said, "Have joy." And it was a terrible voice.
Yeah.
But a great message, and it was speaking in a way that would force me to get past my resistance and my fear to the message of the words. And there's always that in this, and I think everybody who begins to do this is going to find it. This is about growth. It's not about being told how wonderful you are at all. It's about being encouraged, yes.
Exactly.
Am I on the right track with you, or you're...
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it's the great paradox of life is the very, the very event or experience that we say has most troubled us. We get 5 years on it and we go, oh my God, thank God that happened, because it propelled me in a new direction.
Yes.
It made all the difference to my future.
Yes.
And so then what is the bad experience and what's the good?
Let me ask you this. Great question, Lisette. I mean, you're so light, but but you actually say these things that are incredibly profound. I mean, think about what you just said, folks, for a while. There's a lot in those few words. Why do they care? Why would they? Somewhere in a galaxy far away.
Why do they care about us?
About us.
Why do you care about them? It's the same question and the same answer. we're just here living an adventure. They are too. We're their neighbors. Some people like to get out and know each other. Other people want to stay home and watch TV. So it's the same for them. Some of them like to get out and about and know and relate. Others don't. So, it's the same for them. It's the same for us. Those who find that their life is enhanced by knowing and relating to different kinds of ethnicities, those of us who've traveled this globe, it does something to the soul, to travel the plains of Africa and see those living on the Sudan, or to go to Europe and meet the French. It changes us because we have a different spark about different kinds of beings living in different kinds of worlds. Well, why would that be any different for anyone else?
The old lady who was on the cover of Communion communicated to me that the reason she was here was that her growth depended on our growth. In other words...
Exactly.
Yes. And she also indicated to me, and even showed me quite a few images of it, that there is another world right now, quite primitive, that one day we will be the visitors to, and our growth from that point will depend on enabling them to rescue themselves, as the visitors here now are trying to help us rescue ourselves.
Right. I had some beings tell me they cannot experience their oneness without including us.
Exactly. And if there's a discordant note, then it's all, the whole universe is dependent upon everybody going along and seeking into the compassion that actually is the law that rules us all, although we on our world would say that it's the law of retribution. It's not at all.
And having the wherewithal, to work out that which we say we don't like, to heal and get over the stuff that holds us, that continues to haunt us. The group that I'm in touch with has encouraged me over and over, get over the stuff that haunts you, because it's preventing us from going forward, not only as individuals but as a species. So if the myth, if the victimization myth respective to ETs permeates our culture, we can't move forward as we might move forward.
Well, that's a great note on which to end this perfectly wonderful conversation with a person who has become profoundly wise in a light, almost walking on water way. A beautiful book, Listening to Extraterrestrials. Listen to the whispers in the night. They may be whispering to you. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she has a special report for us on crop circle anomalies in Canada. Here she is from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Well, Canada has reported crop formation since about the mid-1990s all over its provinces. But the place that always had the most patterns, for whatever reason, was Saskatchewan until 2004. Currently, Paul Anderson, director of the Canadian Crop Circle Research Network, has a total of 12 crop formations reported in 11 sites, and only one in Saskatchewan. This is the first time this has ever happened, and it only happened in September. It all began back on May 26th of 2004 at the Nahanni Butte in the Northwest Territories. And this is brand new information, and in fact, we're getting new data in on it as we speak, and hopefully there will be photographs of what I'm just going to describe that Paul and I will be putting at his website, which is the Canadian Crop Circle Network Research .ca, and at earthfiles.com. And here is what happened. We just got the report, but we're jumping back to May 26th when it was discovered. And as happens so often unbelievably in this world, people sit on stories because they are afraid of ridicule if they say that there were 2 tree circles of very tall poplars. One circle was 300 feet in diameter, where every single tree had been snapped off and flattened radially. And that means that all the trees, in this case, they all went to the center. All the tops of the trees went to the center. Sort of think of an iris of an eye with the way the lines would come around a hole in the middle. The second one, about a half a mile away, was estimated to be 500 feet in diameter. You've got 2 tree circles, May 26th. Nobody knows anything about them, but there they are, and they are huge. And all those trees in the big 500-foot diameter were snapped off and flattened radially inward with their tops pointing toward the center. And even though these large tree circles were discovered on May 26th, as I just said, Paul didn't receive the reports until the end of August and has been trying to confirm this, and now feels that he has enough confirmation from local media, even if he doesn't yet have photographs. And if you will just keep up with earthfiles.com, as soon as Paul and I feel that we've got the photographs and other eyewitnesses, we're going to report more about these strange tree circles up in the Northern Territory that began the official, we'll call it, crop and tree formation of 2004 in Canada. Now, from May to September, in addition to those 2 tree circles in the Northwest Territories, there were 4 crop formations reported in 3 British Columbia locations, 2 in Alberta, 3 in Ontario, 1 in New Brunswick, and finally 1 in Saskatchewan on September 2nd. This latest pattern is 3 ovals in mixed wheat and pasture grass in Wadena, Saskatchewan. And that is the same farming community that had an odd pattern of 4 ovals in barley last year that was reported on August 19th of 2003. These latest ovals in Wadena are east of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And when I went to a map that I've been using the whole past 10 years for Canadian crop formations, the concentration of yellow marks in Saskatchewan goes along a southeast to northwest corridor. It stands out so clearly. And here's Wadena, part of that crowded pattern. And you can see that map in my report called High Strangeness in Canadian Cattle Corn at earthfiles.com. Just go to the headlines page, find that title, and click. Now, as in the 2004 Hillsborough and Miamisburg, Ohio corn formations in the United States, scientists have been surprised by the number of plant and soil anomalies found this year, and Canada is adding to the anomalies. I talked with Paul Anderson about the latest circles in Wadena, Saskatchewan, as well as a very unusual ring found near Calgary the end of August, and a pattern never seen before in Canada in a place called Matsqui, not far from Vancouver, where Paul found many unusual expulsion cavities shaped like triangles and diamonds in the growth nodes of tall cattle corn. Some of the growth nodes have 3 of these diamonds in the growth node. No one has ever seen this before in that area. We'll begin with the latest September 2nd pattern of 3 circles in Wadena, which covered a distance of about 73 feet. The mixed wheat and pasture grass had been laid down so gently that delicate dirt earthworm mounds right beneath the crops were not even disturbed. Paul also discovered that even though the circles looked geometric, there was something odd about their centers.
All 3 of them are slightly elliptical, and I should note, too, that the center of each one is off-center, which, of course, is another feature that has been noted, over and over again in formations like this over the years.
Yeah, it's a puzzle to the geometry people. Why should there be non-geometrical centers to patterns that otherwise seem geometrical?
Yes. And it's also been taken as a sign to probably indicate genuineness, since if you manually create a circle, just using boards and rope, what have you, In most cases, you'll get something almost like a perfect circle with, the center, pretty much dead center. And yet we find a lot of ones like this, including, some, as you know, on slopes and that kind of thing, where the center is sometimes way off center, even several feet away from the actual geometric center of the circle or oval or what have you. And yet, again, oftentimes beautiful tight lay of the crop, which we have again in this case.
Okay, so this is the most recent so far, reported on September 2nd.
The one in Calgary was reported late in August, actually discovered on August the 26th. And this one was something, kind of different, kind of unusual in the sense that it was found in pasture grass in a large nature park just on the outskirts of town. And we've had ones like this before, of course, as you know, and actually ones in pasture grass have been fairly common in this country. But this one is a single ring, and again, it's an oval. It's not a true circle. But the ring itself is only about approximately a foot and a half wide. But what was interesting about it was that it was centered around a large white rock, which is just sitting in the field. And the rock itself appeared to be just part of the landscape. It didn't look like someone had simply, placed it there. But the ring itself had formed around the rock, so that the rock ended up being almost dead center of this ring. And inside the ring itself, the grass was flattened in all different directions, going on top of each other, even though it was only like, as I said, about a foot and a half in width. And including some of the lay was actually going straight across the width of the ring. So it wasn't just a simple case of somebody walking around, in a circle type pattern and just flattening down even with your feet or something, because, again, you have the lay of the crop, the grass, which is in all different directions, going on top of each other in, 2 or 3 layers sometimes. So it was actually fairly complex.
As we have found in various patterns around the world, were there any indications that plants below the surface might be going 180 degrees or 90 degrees to the surface plants?
In some cases, yeah, like when you had different directions overlapping, it would be at approximately 90 degrees in some cases. You would have, one flow or bunch of plants flattened, going in one direction, and then you'll have this other bunch on top of that, a plant on top of that, sometimes going as much as 90 degrees to that. So, again, that's what I mean by opposing directions, but it was all mixed.
Right.
It's all different in all different parts of the ring.
And what was the diameter of the oval?
Actually, about 40 feet. So nothing too big, again, but, just in terms of how it was actually physically constructed, actually quite interesting.
I'm very curious about the alleged Egyptian Ankh symbol in cattle corn that was reported in early August near a town I do not know how to pronounce. Can you explain this one, Paul, and pronounce that town?
The town is Matskwe, which is actually kind of like a smaller subdivision, if you will, of the town of Abbotsford, where the large formation was found last summer, also in cattle corn. And as you know, this area, which is in the Fraser Valley here, just east of Vancouver, about 50, 60 miles or so, has become somewhat of a hot spot in the last few years now. And all the formations so far in this area have been in the same cattle corn, which is to separate that from the sweet corn, which we also do have around here. But interestingly, for whatever reason, all the formations so far have been in this taller cattle corn. These 2 formations is only just, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 miles or so from the location of the one in Abbotsford last summer. They were both seen at the same time by a woman that had actually gone skydiving. And as the plane was ascending, this was in early August, she noticed the one that she described as looking like an Egyptian Anki symbol first, and then just a few moments after that, spotted the second one, which is a circle with the 2 crescents, a crescent on either side of it. And so far we have found the first one. We found that one a couple of weeks ago, the crescent formation, but we're actually still looking to find the Anki symbol one. We know the approximate location of where it has to be based on where she took off in the plane, and where this one is, because we know it has to be in between somewhere. The problem is we've had the pilots looking for the past week or so now, and they haven't spotted it yet, but they're still looking. And the other problem is that you also cannot see these from any of the roads because the corn is too tall. The corn in these cases, again, is about 7, 8, 9 feet tall. So that's the one thing about these. You can't just drive by the field and, go spot it because you can't see anything.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really important point, not only about these in Canada, but even Miamisburg in Ohio.
Yes.
Jeffrey Wilson and those guys, everybody who went, they were so frustrated because they could not see anything on the ground, and they had to go up in the airplane to find it.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we're pretty confident that this Anki one is there because she did give a good description of it. She did say it was approximately the size of this other one with the crescents, which turned out to be, 174 feet in length. And so we're pretty sure we're going to find it. It might just take a few more days yet, but based on what we found in the first one, I am quite anxious actually to find this other one. So as soon as we do, I'll be sure to let you know about it.
Okay, and when you say Anki, you are saying what in the U.S. we call Ankh.
Ankh, you say Ankh, okay.
Yeah, with that.
That might actually be the correct pronunciation, I'm not sure, but...
Well, whichever it is, it's fascinating that we'll call it a full moon and two crescent moons are the associated other pattern, and I would like to see if there is anything in Egyptian hieroglyphics that resemble this second pattern of the large circle with the two crescents on either side. And I did do some research, and in the history of using symbols for what's called divination and magic, the circle is a symbol known worldwide to represent the woman, eternity, cycles, seasons. The circle is also a term used in ritual when someone casts a circle to work between worlds or dimensions. Protection is needed from above and below. The circle or sphere is equidistant in all directions that pass through its center, and therefore the circle focuses energy into it. The crescent moon is a symbol, historically, of what is called the goddess. The crescent moon can be either growing, getting bigger toward a full moon, or decreasing, becoming a new moon. The waxing moon uses magic rituals for growth and creativity. The waning moon is used to banish negativity. More universally, the circle represents infinite energy or spirit of the universe that cannot be extinguished by the death of matter. The crescent represents the individualized soul or form created from the infinite energy, but brought into seeming duality or polar opposites, such as the yin and the yang. And in this sort of, you call it the theme, having to do with energy, the universality of the spirit and life force somehow cannot actually be extinguished by death, the ancient Ankh symbol was for the ancient Egyptians the symbol of the sign of life that kept evolving beyond the bodies that were wrapped so carefully in all of those tombs in Egypt because of the idea that there was resurrection, there was some kind of eternal life. I find it so interesting that these two patterns, none of which had been either in Canada ever before, the Ankh symbol as of the weekend of September 18th to 19th has still not been found, even though the crescent and the moons are there, and they were found because the skydiver reported both of them. This is a mystery that is still unfolding, that these symbols should have occurred in such a remote area outside of Matsqui. And now I'm going to return to Paul Anderson.
Yes, I'm not sure if there is or not offhand. Someone did mention to me that they thought that this one with the crescents was a pagan symbol of some kind, but again, I don't know specifically what. We've kind of come to expect the unexpected. You never know what's going to happen or where it's going to happen or what it's going to look like. So,
right, and to that very specific point of the unexpected, could you please talk about these diamond-shaped exploded growth nodes and which crop formation you photographed them in, and talk about them, because they're really I think, quite interesting.
Yeah, to me so far, this is the most interesting thing that we have found so far this year. and of any formation that has occurred so far this year. And this is going back to the ones in Cattle Corn and Matsqui, BC. And I'm lucky enough that these are actually not too far from Vancouver, so it's easy to get to these ones. I've been out there a couple times now so far. And again, these are cattle corn. The plants approximately, on average, 7 to 8 feet tall in this case. The ones last year, the plants were about 9 to 10 feet tall. So these are big plants. These are not, spindly stems like you often see with wheat or barley, that kind of thing. The stalks, can be, the stalks are anywhere from, quarter inch to half inch, three quarters of an inch thick. And what we found so far is the one thing so far this year that really has me scratching my head, and it's something that we found last year as well in the formations close to this area. And this is the large, I use the term expulsion cavities because that is what they look like. Now, we don't know for sure exactly if that is actually what they are. Nancy Talbot feels that they are, in having looked at them so far, looked at the photographs and so on that we've sent to her. But these are, you have the nodes along the stalk, and because the stalks are so long, so tall, we have like 7, 8 nodes along on one stalk. Excuse me. And just like last year, we have found that a lot of the nodes, like up to 5, 6 or more per stalk, will have these large expulsion cavities, which in a lot of cases are, as you described, diamond-shaped. But these are large cavities in these nodes. These are anywhere from, quarter inch to even sometimes about half an inch across. These are not small, tiny little, microscopic, holes or anything. These are, you can't possibly miss these if you're looking for them. The question it comes down to is what has caused them. And it was interesting because in the cases, 2 years ago now in Mission, which is also not far from this location, in the same kind of cattle corn again, we didn't find these kinds of cavities in the nodes. There's the 2 formations again in that location, and we didn't find any. But last year we did, in the one at Abbotsford and the one farther east at Agassiz, we did find them. And the one at Abbotsford was the large, what we call the Trident formation, which was 300 feet long, which was quite impressive, by itself in that regard. But when we went into those ones, and now again these ones in Matsqui this year, or at least this one so far at Matsqui, again we have found the same anomalies. And then the other thing that we found was not just the expulsion cavities, but also a lot of stalks again, which have been, cut off or sliced off, however you want to put it, usually at the first or second node above the ground. And it always seems to be through the node. It's not through the stalk in between nodes, but where you actually have a clean cut right through the center of a node, and the stalk is simply cut off. And sometimes it's laying on the ground beside the plant, what's remaining of the standing plant, and sometimes it's not. The thing that gets me again is that there's so many of these. We found quite a few of them just scattered all throughout the formation again, including right in close to the center of the central circle, where there was one stalk in particular we noted that was bent, not at a node, but just bent through the stalk, several inches above the ground. But then at the first node past that, it was cut off, just like all the other ones. So you have this stalk that's kind of like sticking straight up out of the ground and bent at about 90 degrees, and then it's just lobbed off. But then there were many other ones similar to that, all just scattered randomly, apparently, throughout the formation, which were just cut off like at the first node.
And this is Matsqui that has the circle and the 2 crescents on either side. That's
right, the circle and 2 crescents. And again, that's the kind of formation that we haven't seen much before in Canada, not just BC, but any place. Crescents have just never been a common feature. So again, that makes this formation kind of unusual just in that regard as well. But it's these specific anomalies that we have found for, at least the past 2 years now that have yet to be explained.
And I talked with biophysicist W.C. Levengood about these enormous triangle and diamond-shaped holes in the growth nodes in this tall cattle corn in Canada. And he said that in tests that he's done in his laboratory, it would take 17 times the amount of energy to break open the growth node of corn compared to barley or wheat. Again, we are talking about some kind of complex energy system that can be so strong that it can put the corn down in patterns. And in this case, as we have found in a few others, there is even this odd straight across slicing at the either above or through, right through the growth nodes. And this is unique right now in many respects to this area in Canada without anyone fully understanding what is happening here.
Well, Linda, this is, again, it's just absolutely amazing because we're getting to the point here where we have really got proof positive that something anomalous is happening, and it's driving me nuts because the implication of these it's like they're signals from something, and I couldn't help but think about the images of apparent modern military equipment that appear on a rafter in the temple at Abydos in Egypt.
Oh, I know. Yes, you're right.
And I was thinking to myself as I was listening to this, perhaps what we're looking at are time travelers from the past who brought back images that they then put on that temple. And maybe there are other things in Egypt that we haven't found. Or maybe for example, there has been a chamber found beneath the Great Pyramid that the Egyptian Department of Antiquities has refused to allow anyone to explore. So maybe there is some kind of extraordinary link in time between us and ancient Egypt, and we're seeing the effects of it here.
Right. And it's really a mind twister. But after so many people in the abduction cases and people who say that they have had some, at least glancing blow working inside of government military about time travel being one of the keys to this very strange suppressed phenomena, anything now is possible. But boy, I'll tell you what impresses me is the repeatability of the physical evidence and what labs can find.
It's absolutely astonishing, and it seems to me at this point, denial or not, it's almost inevitable that this information is going to enter the mainstream of scientific investigation because it is so well done. I think they're extraterrestrials. I can never tell, actually, where they're coming from.
You know what? At first, a person may not be able to know, Whitley. It's kind of like if I go on a chat room, and I log on and I say, and I key in, hi, how you doing? And somebody returns, hi, how are you? At that moment, if somebody said, who the heck are you talking to? I'd say, I have no clue. And fair enough, we don't know at first. But the key is to continue the conversation. Continue with the process. And more challenging is be willing to keep opening the door a little more as one feels more confident, as one feels safe and empowered. Just continue to open the door, and then we will know. And that's part of the adventure. We don't know at first. The question is, are we willing, though, to know eventually? And so, we also wonder, well, one of the most common questions is, how do we know who we're going to get? It's just too scary, people feel, that we've all heard the terrible, the victimizing and the stories from people who feel that they've genuinely been harmed. And then there's me who says, I've had great experiences. So how do you know who you're going to get? And it's the same. I bring it right back to here. We know that on this planet, we've got Saddam Hussein and Mother Teresa and everybody in between. We've got we have this diverse level of spiritual growth as demonstrated by a person's actions. We know we can pretty much guess where Saddam Hussein is, in his spiritual growth based on his actions, right? And conversely, with the other side of the coin, people who are very much of service, people who just are loving, and you get that about them immediately. So on this planet, in this realm, we don't go around wringing our hands saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm afraid to go to the mall because I don't know who's going to show up," or "Oh my gosh, I'm afraid to go on a date because it's just too scary." We have certain things that we do, and we don't have to say a huge prayer or invoke some special form of protection before we get in our cars and go out.
Because we trust the world we live in.
Yes, and we also know that, to some degree, we're starting to really believe this. We're starting to know this, Whitley, and I think those of us who really are wanting to grow, in our own spiritual sophistication, we're really, and it's so hard sometimes, I agree, but we're wanting to more and more when we have relationships that don't work for us, and let's face it, we all have them. I do too. The difficult, challenging relationships where there's tension and challenge, I still have to come back and say, what is it about me that has called this to myself? What is here for me to what can I learn from this so I can get on with it and move forward? The problem is that we will almost never apply that to our otherworldly experiences. We're so quick to say, I've been victimized, I got nothing to do with it. We don't look at our demeanor. We know that quantum physicists have proven that like attracts like. We know that if we're recently divorced and we're convinced that all of the opposite sex is horrible, then we know, and I know from my experiences way back when I was divorced and I started to date again, that the same kind of person can recontextualize it for people and reframe it that, when we say, why me? Why did they come to me? If we attempt to think of this in a whole different way, that in fact contact is simply about relationships. That's all it is. We meet people here, we meet people there. On this planet, we meet all different kinds of people.
Right.
And the quality and the manner of those relationships depend on us and them. And, there's all kinds of work that's been written about how to improve our marriages and how to improve our love relationships and our work relationships ad nauseum. The problem and the challenge is that usually we don't recognize that if we want to improve, if you will, the quality and manner of our otherworldly relationships, all we need to do is apply the same principles. Because the universal law holds. And how I mean that is that we can't pretend that we have something to do with the quality and manner of our relationships with each other and pretend that we have nothing whatsoever to do with those beings who are not across the street but across the galaxy or across the universe, as it were.
Now, let me ask you this. I tried some of the methods in your book just last night.
Right.
And there was an immediate result. And I wasn't too surprised that there would be, because they're not so different from the methods I use myself.
Right.
Now, I have the same question for you that I have for myself. Who is out there? Is it why do you think there's an event on Dreamland Indeed when Lisette Larkins is back with us? She's the author of 2 of your favorites, Talking to Extraterrestrials and Calling on Extraterrestrials. And now she has got a new one out, the book that has been begging to be written, Listening to Extraterrestrials, Telepathic Coaching by Enlightened Beings. And before I go to Lisette, I just want to read something from the foreword to give you an idea of where we're going here. The foreword was not written by Lisette. It was written by Dutchy Kid, an abduct or contactee, I guess, who has simply read the book and made use of it, and says, you see, this book was written for people like me, for ordinary people who desire contact and work to achieve it. So if that's not what you desire, then don't listen to this. But there is a good side to the whole contact issue. As you know, I've experienced both sides myself, and there is a good side. And so, Lisette, why don't we start by going through a little bit of your early life and why this came into your life?
Thanks, Whitley. That's a challenging question to answer. And the older I get and the more I have these contacts and experiences with these otherworldly beings, the more I keep wanting to showing up based on what belief I had about men. I mean, it's uncanny how what we believe shows up. It shows up. So it's so important to start noticing that in those ways we're calling a certain type to ourselves. And if we search our soul and we search our heart and say, you know what, I feel that I have been a certain kind of generous, loving person, and I'm still attracting victimizers, we can still do something with that information. But we do not have to become traumatized, become fearful, and then slam the door to further experience.
Right. Well, exactly. I did become traumatized and fearful, but I did not do that because I didn't see any evidence that what was there was really negative, and it was very much in my physical environment at the time, and I was dreadfully afraid, but I forced myself to go past my fear, and I would not say that it ever opened up into a sort of it was actually all wonderful deal.
Right.
They were tough as nails always, but never, I don't think they were ever menacing toward me. I was never sure, and I'll tell you why. One time, about a year after I had my first remembered close encounter in December of '85, I got this, what I would say was a call to go down into the woods, and in the early hours of the morning, and I knew suddenly that the visitors were there, and understand I had sort of planned